narrative doesn't exist solely in the perception of one man, but in the hearts and eyes of the Hong Kong and Chinese public. The case question you have asked us today is, how do you install and communicate the New World grand narrative values to property buyers, retailers, and consumers in order to double your revenue in 5 years? The key to this case question is your grand narrative. So to answer it, we must start at looking at what your grand narrative is now and what we propose it should be.
In order to define your grand narrative, we need to look at the values that people associate you with. Currently, with respect to property development, your customers lump you with all other property developers. They see you as possibly untrustworthy and exploitative. With respect to malls, the value that people currently associate you with is that you are very Adrian-driven in your vision and that you provide a fixed art experience that does not change very often. Through our strategy, New Generation, we propose you make 2 changes. Through the first strategy arm, Fix, we propose that you focus on the property investment side and introduce a 4 Rs framework to install the new values that you are trustworthy and that you are fair. Through the second strategy arm, Capture, we propose that you focus on malls to instill and communicate the new values that you are people-driven in your experience and that you provide a dynamic art experience that changes very often. By following Fix and Capture, you are able to double your revenue. Let's take a step back and start with the key issues and analysis that has driven this proposal.
So in looking at your business, we have identified 2 key segments. Firstly, property buyers and investors, and secondly, retailers and consumers. And both of these provide different key issues. The first key issue that we have identified is public perception. The public in both Hong Kong and China perceive property developers and by association New World as untrustworthy, deceitful and misleading. You must differentiate yourself from this issue in order to not only secure future revenue for following generations, but in order to drive this new revenue target and to develop your new grand narrative.
With respect to retailers and consumers, the key issue is your sales drivers. As you can see from the graph here, to reach your targeted sales, you're currently making Adrian the man of your grand narrative, and you're providing a fixed art experience that has not changed from the first day that it was built. This is simply not enough to allow you to double your revenue. You must instead focus on providing an experience that Hong Kong and Chinese consumers have chosen themselves, and to change that experience very often to provide them with new incentives to come into your mall. To further understand your customer, we have conducted a customer analysis to see who your customer is and why they choose your brand. Of the 3 customers you can see here, I'd like to quickly define a weekend tourist. We see the weekend tourist as a Chinese or a foreign customer that flies to Hong Kong on a weekend with 2 empty suitcases and goes back home on a Sunday with 2 full suitcases full of clothing and accessories that they bought from your mall. With respect to your shopping mall customers, they choose your brand because you can sell them the same Dior product that possibly Sogo does, but you provide them with an art experience alongside that brand. With respect to your property investment customers, they choose you because you represent the status of moving towards a young, multicultural and wealthy Hong Kong business generation. To add value to this customer analysis, we've identified the opportunities you can achieve here by looking at how you can earn from these customers. You can earn from your shopping mall customers by allowing them to take home their art experience in a way or in the form of a product. You can earn from your property investment customers by adding value to their status purchases. Because these customers are your sea turtles, perhaps you're only 28 and they haven't reached the peak of their wealth, and yet they're still spending beyond their means. Therefore, they still want good value for money.
On the back of these two issues, we suggest you implement our strategy, the new generation, which has two arms, fix and capture. The implementation of this strategy will be talked about in reference to Hong Kong, but is designed to be scalable, to be implemented across second and third tier cities in China, which is where the most revenue is generated from. The first arm of this strategy is fix, and it is designed largely to fix this mistrustworthy perception among the Chinese and Hong Kong public. And it has 4 key things that you must do: respond, recover, remediate, and review. Under the arm respond, we suggest that you release a documentary across a variety of different social media methods. Under the arm recover, we suggest you do 2 things. Firstly, reduce the cost of your apartments, and secondly, to increase the value offering through partnering with a whiteware firm. Under remediate, we suggest that you need to build community within these apartments. And finally, in review, release a New World manifesto in which you identify key elements of this new grand narrative. The implementation of this arm is key in relation to the case question to communicate and instill the values of being trustworthy and fair, and it does this in 3 key ways. Under the first 2 arms, respond and recover, you are able to provide proof that your business is above this perception, as well as provide tangible benefits to those who want to live in your apartments and those who currently do, that you are trustworthy and that you are fair. And this not only communicates, but also instills these values. Through the arm remediate, you are able to show that you care about the community in Hong Kong, which communicates and instills these values in the general Hong Kong and Chinese public. And through the arm review, in which you release a New World manifesto identifying key values, you are able to truly show you are trustworthy as you are open to public accountability to these values. Ultimately, this arm of the strategy, through an increase in the sale of apartments, will reach this double revenue target.
The second arm of our strategy allows you to capture the hearts and the minds and the wallets of your customers in 3 ways. First, we propose that you develop temporary art displays and also temporary pop-up stores for your local designers in your malls, and that you change these temporary displays every 2 months. Secondly, we propose that you allow the Hong Kong and Chinese people to vote for which temporary displays and pop-up stores they want to see in your malls through a social media platform. Thirdly, we propose that you partner with retailers such as Dior to have them develop customized products that are differing depending on the temporary art display that is on at the time. Following this strategy will allow you to communicate and instill the people-driven dynamic art experience for 3 reasons. First, by introducing temporary art displays, you are constantly changing the art experience in your mall so that you are constantly giving your customer a new reason to come and visit your mall. Secondly, by developing or allowing temporary pop-up stores of Hong Kong and Chinese local designers, you are instilling and communicating the value that you are for the local people and for the everyday entrepreneur. Secondly, by giving the customer the chance, or rather the Chinese and Hong Kong customer the chance to choose these temporary displays on social media platform, you're communicating and instilling the value that the experience is driven by them. It's a people-driven experience. And finally, by partnering with retailers, you, if we go back to this customer analysis, are giving the customer an ability to take home their art experience, which will make them choose the customized Dior product in your mall instead of the standardized Dior product in Sogo.
The case question that we have identified today set 3 clear objectives. How do you install and communicate the values of the new grand narrative? And ultimately, how do you drive revenue? So this clearly comes back to the values of the new grand narrative for New World, and these are implemented through our strategies. Through the arm capture, you are able to show that you are people-driven and dynamic. And through the arm fix, you are able to show that you are both trustworthy and fair. and the implementation of both of these strategies ensures that you reach your revenue target. We now pass you on to Nathan and Kanda to deal with finance and implementation of this strategy.
The first arm of our strategy, Fix, looks to target the image of property developers in general and place ourselves apart from that in order to sell apartments in the long run. The second arm of our strategy, Capture, looks to leverage this into increased revenues from malls in general. Kanda will take you through how we implement this strategy, while I will follow with the financial impact of this. The criteria for the strategies we've implemented today are firstly that they fit with the idea of the New World narrative. So we want to be progressive for the Asian community and progressive for Hong Kong in general. Secondly, we look to make it fit what the communities want in terms of property development and be positive for the growth of the community. And finally, they look to target the growing middle to upper class in Asia and really bring back those sea turtles to home. This is going to drive revenue for New World into the future through apartment sales and through this dynamic experience in malls.
Our first strategy, Fix, proposes that in order to effectively recover from the damage that has happened to your brand, and in order to effectively communicate and instill the New World message into every heart of every Hong Kong person, you need to implement a four-stage strategy. This consists of firstly responding, recovering, remediating, and then reviewing. In order to respond, we propose that you create a documentary which consists of the history of Hong Kong accommodation. When creating this documentary, you need to ensure that everything you do is completely honest and truthful, and you must involve the real hearts, real emotions, and real opinions of every Hong Kong person to show that you really are a brand for the people. We also propose that you distribute this documentary through multiple social media platforms such as WeChat and Weibo in order to effectively target your audience. The second part, React, believes that you need to renovate every of your apartments in order to show that you really do care about the Hong Kong community. In order to implement this, we believe you need to do two things. Firstly, you must partner with a large whiteware company in Hong Kong and implement high-quality whiteware into all of your apartments. Secondly, you must lower the margin you have on each of your apartments in order to maximize the utilization of each of your apartments, in order to show that not only do you care, you really are doing something to make a tangible difference to the Hong Kong community. The third part, Remediate, proposes that you create local communities in each of the apartments and create a global community which consists of each of these local communities to show that they are a part of something that is bigger than them and is in the long-term benefit for Hong Kong. The last part, Review, proposes that you create a panel board who will create a manifesto which consists of two things. Firstly, the values that you have changed and the requirements that you have changed for all future apartment buildings to show that you really are going to make a difference to accommodation in Hong Kong. In order to implement the strategy, we propose you do this over a space of 2.5 years. Firstly, after implementing Respond over 4 months, you will have achieved 90% penetration into your target audience with your documentary through social media platforms, and you will have 90% positive feedback of this documentary. Once you achieve this, you can move on to our next stage, React. Through this, you will also have a 90% uptake of people into your apartments, which will increase your utilization to 100%, and you'll have a successful partnership in whiteware. After this, to implement our third part, Remediate, over a space of 1.5 years, you will successfully put the whiteware in and develop these partnerships. The last stage, which will last over 4 months of review, you will effectively create the manifesto and constantly review and release this manifesto to the Hong Kong public.
In terms of the costs to implement this strategy, we look to those costs which will increase at a greater proportion than revenues. Firstly, we will look to administrative expenses, whereby we create a culture in the apartments that we build by having a greater presence in them. Secondly, we look to selling and marketing expenses. Through the videos and documentaries that Kanda has discussed, we look to market an image, and that's going to require an increased investment. Finally, by our whiteware partnership and increasing the fit-out quality that we put in these apartments in order to generate this image, we increase these costs by 5%. What we take is an increased cost base, but a product which really is consistent with the image we want in the housing that we provide to the Hong Kong and Asian communities. How we see this playing out in terms of an increase in revenue from apartments is 90% from China in first and second tier cities and 10% in Hong Kong. What we would do is focus on those apartments with higher square meterage. We're targeting high-end customers, high to middle-end customers, and we see this as the most appropriate form of housing. In terms of total buildings, this will be at 100 apartment blocks per year across both locations, generating revenues of 35 billion from this arm of the strategy into the future.
Our second strategy, Capture, proposes that not only do you create a unique experience for your mall goers, but you allow them to take it home. And by doing this, you can capture their hearts and their purchases. The first part of this proposes that you increase your art exhibitions above what you have currently, as it is not sufficient. We propose you expand into multimedia forms like the Maori haka and the Japanese samurai to really engage your people who go to your malls. The second part of the strategy is to implement pro bono stores from local Hong Kong designers. The way we propose you do this is that every 2 months you choose a local Hong Kong person who is not able to get their foot into the retail store door. So you can do two things. Firstly, you can help the local community, but you can show the local community that you're helping the local community, therefore effectively enabling you to communicate and instill your message in the hearts of Hong Kong people. As well as this, we propose that you create products which directly relate to the art exhibitions. The reason for this is currently you have great art exhibitions. However, this is not translating directly into purchases. By partnering with your current brands to create products like the Maori Moko and the Maori Koru, when someone sees a Maori haka, they're incentivized to purchase the product, therefore increasing your revenues and your engagement. The last part of the strategy proposes that you create social media platforms through which people can go online and vote for which Hong Kong person they believe should be in your pro bono stores and which art form you should deliver. We also believe that it's effective for you to allow people to come in with iPads to take photos of everything and upload this to a cloud system storage so that not only can Hong Kong see what you're doing, but the entire world can. In order to implement this strategy, we propose you do this over a space of 1 year. The first thing you need to do is determine which art exhibitions you wish to display. After this, you can begin displaying these. You can then specifically choose which young Hong Kong people you want to display in your pro bono stores. And then you can open it up to the public to begin to review and cycle through every 2 months who's going to be in the store and what you're going to be displaying.
In terms of the costs to implement this strategy, we look to focus on those forms that Ken-Up has discussed, mainly in small items such as the artwork and such as these dynamic expressions that people can take home. What this looks to do is increase the foot traffic through our malls by 50%, as people have a reason to come back month after month after month. What this allows us to do is increase the membership on the New World Club. It also allows us to increase the revenues we earn from the sites in the store, driving revenue going forward. In terms of how we use this to drive revenue and doubling it in the next 5 years, we firstly look to our first strategy of Fix. This created $35 billion worth of revenue. The final $9 billion comes from our second arm of Capture. So we see from these two strategies, we capture the apartments, and we then leverage this into our presence in malls. I'd now like to hand you back to Alex and Brittany, who will take you through the conclusion.
So to summarize here, today you've essentially asked us, what should your new grand narrative be, and what should you do with that grand narrative? We've come to this question and taken it in two parts. First, with respect to your question, what should your new grand narrative be? We've given you two new values to aspire to. First, with respect to your property development, the new value you should be aspiring to is to be trustworthy and to be fair. Secondly, with respect to your malls, the new value that you should be aspiring to is to be people-driven and to have a dynamic art experience. The second question you asked us is, now that we have this new grand narrative, what should we do with it? And we've come here and told you that you must not only communicate this grand narrative, but you must also instill it into the hearts of your consumers to make it something they truly resonate with. To communicate and instill, we've given you two strategy arms. One, fix, to develop the 4-arm framework in order to change your property investment values. And secondly, capture, to develop the temporary art displays and pop-up, and local designers, to communicate and instill the values of a people-driven dynamic art experience. Following this strategy allows you to double your revenue in 5 years.
It is clear that a brand doesn't solely exist in the perception of one man. One man alone cannot drive the Hong Kong public to revisit your malls or to buy your apartments. Instead, it is their hearts and their minds that you must win over. Through the implementation of our strategy, you install these key values in both their hearts and minds and ultimately gain their wallets too. Thank you, and we now open the floor to questions.
So perhaps I can kick off, and I think we all need a strategy to double revenue in 5 years. That would be very good. I guess my first question relates to really the mall business and how, obviously, I think in what we're seeing recently in Hong Kong and China is a lot of cannibalization, I think, of retail traffic through e-commerce. And specifically in China, but also in Hong Kong. So I guess my question is, how would you think about in your new grand narrative? How would you think about merging the e-commerce aspects of retailing to the mall?
Yeah.
And then, if I may, just a second question as well, just more financial related, but I guess obviously I think. Doubling revenue is great, and you also touched on the cost aspect.
Yeah.
I guess, what would you say if you saw some the cost increase without the revenue, which obviously is a possibility in certainly the early stages.
Absolutely.
as your strategy unfolds. How would you think about addressing that and concerns with investors and so forth?
Okay, so we're going to take your question in two parts. Kenda, would you mind bringing up the slide on e-commerce, please? It's right below the slide deck. So we're first going to take your question about e-commerce, which, if I could clarify, is how we're going to integrate e-commerce and reduce cannibalization. I'll take that. And then the second question relates to finances, and Nathan will discuss that. So we've looked at e-commerce, and we discussed this quite extensively in the case room. And what we've found is there are 3 reasons why you shouldn't introduce e-commerce immediately. First of all, you do not have a current e-commerce platform, and it's extremely expensive to create. And yes, we do concede that e-commerce is strong in Hong Kong and Asia because of Tmall, Taobao, etc. But these providers will all try to squeeze your margins as far as possible because they need to take their share of the pie as well. So that's the first reason. The second reason here is that your core value is that you must create an art experience. As we discussed, it's a people-driven, dynamic art experience. That's something that current technology cannot allow you to provide through an online platform itself. Thirdly, we're looking at the concept of status, which, as we discussed in your customer analysis, is absolutely crucial, especially to your sea turtles. There's nothing that we can boast about in online shopping except to find cheaper prices. And that's not what your sea turtles are about. So ultimately, what we're trying to say here is that you must first stay true to the values of your new grand narrative, and providing that in not only a communication, which we agree can be achieved online, but also through an instill, which must be achieved through physical presence. As soon as you achieve that narrative, and as soon as people understand and it resonates with them, then you can think about establishing an e-commerce platform.
To take the second part of your question, can I confirm that you're talking in relation to apartments and the development of those in general, or are you referring to both apartments and our mall infrastructure? Both in general. So I'll start with apartments. What we look to do is increase our buildings in places which we believe there is strong demand. So we saw that there was a significant sort of less volatility in the prices of apartments in those higher square meterage areas. So we're targeting an area which we believe has a high demand for it. So the price hopefully will continue. Where we see costs escalating beyond that level, there is room in the strategy to sort of scale that back. We don't want to be building apartments that aren't going to be providing a profit to us. We believe that the model that we work on and expanding through this sort of strategy of having real value in the product we provide will limit that sort of lack of demand. And we want to be the provider that has the best quality for that reason. So in essence, in the first strategy of the apartments, we build demand and we target an area which is strong demand. In terms of the malls we look at, the costs we're associated with, we'd be looking to partner with some of those brands and to get them into the image as well. So where Alex has discussed Dior, we'd look to have them sort of produce these products and get in on the image, therefore limiting the costs for us. Obviously, over time in the phase process that we input, the cost of these relative to the benefits going to be measured, and the scale at which we do these will be discussed as well. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Maybe just a quick one. You put a lot of faith in whiteware. If you go and see the show flats in Hong Kong, particularly those built by New World, it is superb whiteware. So, I mean, the idea that you might be able to do something better in terms of whiteware, I mean, I understand that you're not necessarily familiar with Hong Kong, but I think a whiteware strategy would be a difficult one to introduce here in Hong Kong. If you talk more about introducing technology, smart, sustainability, differentiating in those ways, I would be more comfortable, because I think those are more, they're better drivers, if you like, of a differentiation strategy. Whiteware, I'm a little nervous about, if you like. The other thing is saving cost. Difficult in Hong Kong, high land costs, high construction costs, but also New World's a public company and they have shareholders, and if they start reducing margins, there's going to be potentially some comment. Again, I would have preferred you to look at value add rather than cost saving. I mean, a lot of what you're suggesting is value add, but I would just rebrand it value add rather than cost saving, because I think from a positioning perspective, it sounds and it rings much better.
So just to respond to that, in terms of what we look at in profit margins, we'd reduce them in order to have this sort of responsibility with our stakeholders. So we'd look, I guess we see that apartment buildings in Hong Kong and China don't necessarily sell out. So we want to increase, hopefully overall, the profit, and assuming that they don't sell out through doing this. And secondly, in looking at whiteware, we were looking to target something that really had a quality aspect to it in the apartment. So we take your point that they already have whiteware. And we would look to target something that, as you say, is a bit more of a value add there.
I have one comment and one question. On the comment part, I think your timeline for the residential part, I mean the building part, is not very visible. Maybe you don't know how long it takes, to develop property in Hong Kong, okay? So usually it takes 4 to 5 years time. So in that case, your time frame a little bit, too short, too aggressive. So this is our comment here. And secondly, my question is, what is your strategy in the China business part? Seems to me that your focus point is in Hong Kong. So may I know something about the China strategy on the residential, the buildings, the flats for those buyers?
So we'll address your question in two parts. Firstly, I'll talk about the timeline, and Alex or someone else can discuss the China part. In terms of the timeline, what we talked about was not the building of new apartments, but rather was referring to the renovation of current ones. So if, Brittany, if you could bring up the timeline for the second strategy. Our timeline consists of 4 parts. The first part was, should come up now. The first part was to remediate, as in develop whiteware, which we don't believe will take very long, and to reduce the costs, which we also don't believe will take very long. And the rest of them were things like review, and those are just creating referendums. In terms of building, we saw that the review part would be simply implementing the recommendations we have in future building. So the timeline did not take into account future building. It's just looking at the current position, how you can position yourself best currently. We do understand it'll take much longer to create new buildings.
So to answer the part about Chinese strategy, what we've done here is purposely pitched you a very scalable strategy, and we've asked you to start in Hong Kong because that is the root of your business. That is where the majority of the accusations are coming from, and therefore you need to fix your foundation first before you look into China. If we look at the scalability of this strategy, if it is successful in Hong Kong, that will provide you with an indication that you can be successful in China. And we would propose that as soon as you see the signs of success, that you at the same time move to implement the exact same strategy in China, having consideration to the cultural similarities and also the Chinese demand similarities to Hong Kong. I think Brittany wants to add something.
Just to build on what Alex has already mentioned, the strategy was designed specifically to be scalable to China. And the key reason behind that is this distrust that we see already in Hong Kong, over especially towards property developers trying to fudge the margins essentially, is even more prevalent when we move to China. So facing further hurdles in China is why we started at home in Hong Kong.
I want to supplement your answer. I mean, give you my comment on this. Mind you that the Chinese, culture in buying properties in China is totally different from Hong Kong. So their pattern, especially those big players in property market in China, they're totally different from those big players in Hong Kong. So I think the positioning is totally different. So by scaling, extending the scaling, our Hong Kong strategy in China, I don't think that can be workable in that sense, first thing. Second thing, for the timeline. China is blooming all the time, and the development is really fast, right? So if we want to wait until 4 years, 5 years down the road and test the Hong Kong market before we move into China, so we're way down, So that's the timing issue you have to address. So I'm proposing you better look into another strategy for the China property development market, how we have a better strategy across the board rather than like in Hong Kong.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Wish to echo a bit about Teddy's comments. I think in terms, China and Hong Kong are really under two very different business landscapes, so to say. For your strategy on e-commerce, I think the pace of development of e-commerce in China as compared to Hong Kong are very different. China is very advanced in terms of e-commerce in a sense, and Hong Kong is quite different than the China market. They can buy veggie and meat online, but Hong Kong, I don't think we will realize this situation in the very soon or foreseeable future, so to say. That's one thing. I think the culture, as in every international trade situation, you have to really look differently, China and Hong Kong. But I do see some similarity between that. And your lucrative proposal to have a 5 years, plan is really attractive. But in the midst of that, I cannot totally agree with your step-by-step approach to the thing because of the advancement through internet. I think you have to let me know more about how you promote your program in the midst of the fast-moving trend worldwide, not just Hong Kong, not just China. Everybody's moving so fast. Every quarter there will be a new trend, and every few years there will be a new generation. How do you catch up with this sort of sentiment of the market instead of doing things like pace? No, I'm not saying that we do not go systematically, but how do you tackle the situation of the fast-moving world? And the other thing I want to point out is we being in New World, I do not think we are doing just an Adrian-driven, system. But I do see most of you do fixated at this perception. I don't know why, but yeah, I think we are not that. But your saying seems to be suggesting that New World only do art-related promotion, but that's not the case. Yeah, maybe you have to look more through through different channels that's available in the market. Yeah, please answer the first question.
Okay, so I'll start by answering the first question, and then Kandap will address the next two questions, which regards really the implementation of our strategy. So, Teddy, I think this kind of answers your question as well. I think you two are very concerned about why we aren't simultaneously going into Hong Kong and China, and why we're using the same strategy, or why we're proposing you a scalable strategy. It goes back to which market you understand the most. That's the first thing. You understand the Hong Kong market the most, and as you say, the Chinese market is very different to Hong Kong, and therefore there may be significant confusion if you try to introduce it in the same time. This is especially true because today we're telling you you must not only communicate your new narrative, but you must also instill that into people's minds. It's easy to simply go into a new market and communicate and say, hey, these are our new values. But it's a lot harder to make them actually resonate with that in their hearts. If you're trying to do that with the Hong Kong people, at the same time you're trying to do that with the Chinese people, you may run into not only some logistical, but also some planning issues and also some practicality issues, especially because of how different they are.
In terms of your first question about the overly systematic approach of our timeline, we see there are two key parts of our strategy. Firstly, physical building, and secondly, abstract things. In terms of the physical building, such as putting in whiteware, creating new buildings, we see there is a physical limitation you can't overcome. However, what we have actually addressed is that we have created systems such as taking photos in the store onto a cloud system the entire world can see. Every 2 months, we're having recycling, new people coming through. We're using innovative social media platforms, which can be immediately placed upon and continually reviewed and placed around the entire world, be it China or Europe. And that is a part of our strategy which works immediately. So we're not just focusing on a systematic timeline. In terms of the second part of your strategy about the focusing on the one person, we do agree that this person has come from the bottom to the top, and that's a great thing to portray. However, what we see is the current perception of the apartments market is that almost every company is a power-hungry mongrel, no matter what. And so, although you have great intentions, we believe it's more important to shift the focus away from this one person, although it may be great, towards the Hong Kong people, because they need to know that it's about them. And so that's essentially why we believe we should do that.
I understand from the materials that it says the Hong Kong developers tend to have a very negative reputation in Hong Kong. And I saw that you guys spent quite some time on how to rebrand New World. But it seems it takes a lot of time. Is there a quicker solution and more effective solution? Because we can't wait 2 years.
Essentially, if you look at our timeline, the first thing we say is to create a documentary. And we believe it's important for you to take it systematically, as if you do the documentary first and you do the remediate and the review and everything else, it seems like you're just trying to do everything at once and you're just trying to basically push back. But what we see is you need to instill things in their heart. So rather than just telling them this is what the truth is, believe in it, by doing it in a systematic process, you're slowly putting the idea in their head and making them truly believe in it. So we believe that the whole recovery process is a process that needs to take time, and you can't simply push things into people's face.
Coming back to the key purpose of New World being a family-run business, I think it's crucial that you perceive your apartment building as a place where you'd want your family to live. So in order to combat this negative perception that all you're doing is just building an apartment building to get as much profit as you can, I think it's crucial that you do take this 4R response. Otherwise you will just seem, as Candup said, that you're just trying to that you're on the back foot and you're trying to be defensive instead of actively showing that in the first place you're a family-run business and you're just there to ensure that for future generations of your own family there's a sustainable future.
Just a follow-up question as well. In terms of rebranding and creating the level of trust, you didn't really spend a lot of time talking about corporate sustainability, charity, giving back to the community in a more tangible manner. How does that factor into sort of the overall plan? I mean, that would seem to me the most direct, right? To as Conrad says, the most direct and most immediate impact. Whereas the rebranding will take a lot more time. And if you can rebrand in 2-3 years, that's already pretty quick.
Sorry, University of Auckland, we'll have to stop you there. The regulations only allow 20 minutes of the Q&A.
Too bad.